Well, let's kick this off with an introduction. I'm August Cole from the Art of the Future project at the Atlantic Council. We're joined by Director Ben Alderton and Emma Angelis of the Royal United Services Institute to talk about the recent AI and conflict theater event that we held in London at Central St. Martin's. Emma and Ben, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, August.
So like a lot of the things that we do at the Art of the Future project, this was a very experimental evening, but one that seemed to generate pretty positive feedback. Ben, I'd like to start from your perspective, what you brought to this in considering how to create a theater experience that could both prompt a mix of audience from experts to neophytes to think about AI and the future of conflict differently, but also how to engage the actors to really get them to kind of participate in a way that maybe they hadn't before.
Well, it's something that people from that world aren't really used to. I think the arts as a form of communication, but it really works. The proof was in the pudding. And with the actors, it didn't really take a lot from me, mainly because they were very close colleagues who were very passionate actors, but also artists as well. And you know, we're put up for so much boring material and stuff that we don't want to do. So, you know, finally when something juicy and meaty comes along, you know, it didn't take a lot. You know, they were bringing so much work into the room, and you know, I gave them stimulus and I gave them sort of things to look at and research and videos, and you know, I lectured a bit so they could understand the world. But they brought a huge amount, because I think from the off they realised just how important it is. You know, we weren't just, you know, faintly talking vaguely about a big subject. We were, you know, striking the heart of it. And I think they felt that responsibility, and they weren't stressed by it. They saw it as a wonderful opportunity, and I think they were quite honoured to do something like that.
Well, the proof was certainly in the performance. It was extraordinary to see these crowdsourced and commissioned plays brought to life. You know, Emma, the context that an event like this fits into within the larger think tank community in London. Give us some perspective on how this looks in retrospect now that we've had a little over a week since the event happened.
I think it's really shown how we can do things differently and be innovative and really use sort of a dialogue between the arts and the experts to bring like really important issues to a much wider audience than, you know, the audience that we'll be able to capture at a traditional think tank event. So it's really allowed us to experiment, reach out to people that would not otherwise have engaged with these themes or with the think tank community, and kind of show us a way forward and how we can do things from now on, and sort of move away from the classic conference plus research paper format and really expand the way in which we do things. So it was really, really positive, and I think everyone's question afterwards was, what's next? So that's really positive.
That's the best kind of response you can get when people are looking forward to more. It raises an interesting question too, Ben, when you look at the sort of lessons learned or the things that you see in terms of your directing the actors, when you want to come up with the kinds of next steps for directing a similar type program. What would you tell the next round of actors, or the same actors for that matter, if they were to do this again?
More. It's basically, to put it crudely, in terms of I think the themes are so provocative, and I think it's our job to do it more. I mean, they did a great job, but it's almost, you know, don't be shy. You know, really, the material's all there. Don't skirt around it. And the next stage, I think, would be just expanding it bigger, broader. That doesn't mean being controversial or kicking the hornet's nest on purpose, but it's getting to the heart of these issues. Because what I learned, especially from that event, is that a lot of the conversations, which I didn't think would happen, was based around what they saw. It was a stimulus. So the more penetrating it can be, and the more to the source it can be, and tackling the problem, or even identifying the problem and putting it on a plate, you know, and say, sort of, go on, chew that. I think that would be the next stage. But I think myself and the actors were very, very excited about what would the next stage be in terms of expanding and research and development.
You know, this is an interesting, experimental question, but could you put non-actors on stage? You know, perhaps a policymaker, a military official, somebody who's not part of the ordinary cadre of performers in that kind of an environment, or is that a bridge too far?
I never say never, but I think it would be a bridge too far in terms of they're such juxtaposing worlds. And I say that as someone who used to be a soldier, you know, who's from that world, that it creates a certain type of beast and specimen to sort of do that, you know. And that's why they're in their blacks rather in a suit in Westminster. They could get involved, they can collaborate, but I think getting them to do it would be hard and difficult for everyone.
Although having said that, a couple of our speakers, you know, got in touch a few days before, and because they knew it was about theatre, they knew it was a different format, they asked if we could, you know, be part of doing rehearsals. So I think they really got into it, and in a way, they felt that they were also walking on stage and kind of having to not necessarily match the, you know, performances that came, but kind of speak to that. So in that sense, I think they felt that they were, you know, part of the overall.
Well, the speakers definitely were part of the overall thing, and they did seem to be not performing. That's the wrong word, because that seems like it's conceived. They were trying to match their presentation because they knew it was big and epic. They weren't just sort of shuffling on and being sort of modest and humble. They were really giving their 2 cents worth, because the actors were.
You know, Ben, the kind of direction that you gave the actors, unpack that a bit more in terms of really bringing out these human elements that stage does so well when we're talking about almost esoteric concepts around technology. I'd love to get a feel for, you know, how do you get someone to play a machine who is evidently not a machine themselves? That seems like a really difficult job to do dramatically and creatively.
Yeah, it was. So that first of all meant I had to go away for months and months and months and figure out how we were going to tackle this. Because when you're playing human characters, you're getting into the character analysis and the psyche and the world, which is sometimes can be very difficult and sometimes can be very easy. And when you're playing machine, that's different. So to unpack the rehearsal exercises that we did, we had to build the world, and we wanted it to be a very strong world so that the audience wouldn't question it and they could believe in it and understand it and invest themselves in it, and almost that typical thing of suspend their disbelief. So we created a world that was very strong with very strong characters. In terms of the pre-war games scene, I discovered early on that these AIs were trying to be as human as possible. And that's very disturbing because robots can't be human. And that's where the dislocation came in. We did a lot of exercises because it was set in the future, that we're used to instant gratification with media and social media and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and texting. Our brains are so much advanced. I mean, if you speak to your parents, your grandparents, you know, they text a lot slower, and that's not their fault. They're just not used to it. So imagine in 30 years' time how everyone would be. So we did all these exercises about speed of thought and speed of action. You know, things aren't indulgent anymore. There's no dead space. And that was just about playing games, telepathy, a lot of Meisner technique, a lot of playfulness as well. And we did a lot of strong character research and movements and Laban and Lecoq technique in terms of discovering the physicality, because they were playing robots, they were playing AIs. So that needed to be ingrained and very clear and very economical in how they moved.
There was an element of almost natural relationship between the AIs and pregame discussion that you're talking about. You know, this play, for those who haven't seen it, was the relationship that a very isolated soldier has with her 3 artificial intelligence entities that have an almost custodial-like affinity for her and intervene at a really critical point in her journey as both a warrior, but also as a human, and act out of, I guess, kindness and love. You know, a real emotional, more than rational type set of actions. But Ben, it was interesting. You know, the dialogue in that play is very fast, and it requires not only the back and forth to be quite sprightly, but there is a level of like physicality that went with that. So talk about how you kind of made that manifest too.
crudely, lots and lots of speed runs, the simple thing of just listening and responding, the idea that these AIs know each other backwards, and they know the human backwards as well. They know all her past history, you know, they've got all her historical records. So, and as I was saying, they're very economic, so they're as quick as they possibly can, and that's what we worked with in the rehearsal room, of just very easy listening and responding exercises. And also we did this idea of with humans, when you're going through a script, you know, doing the whole method acting thing, you have objectives and super objectives and actions and things you need to achieve, without getting too technical. With these robots, it's very clear. Their super objective is to serve her by any means necessary. So if you remove all the fluff away from it, all the dead space, that it makes it almost easier for the actors, because it means they have to be very practical, very honest, and quite ruthless. Is what am I doing with this line? What am I doing here? What am I trying to do? So that means they can be very specific. So in a way, that takes the pressure off the actor, because they don't have to get into the mind of, oh, what would this human feel at this moment? Do I believe it? Do I believe myself? That doesn't matter. They're a robot. They have one trigger. They have one objective, and that's it.
Emma, as a producer of the event, you know, the idea of putting dramatic performances interspersed with policy discussion, expert discussion, what did you feel that the connection between performance and discussion evolved throughout the event? Did you feel like it was tethered closely enough, or is that the sort of thing you think we could connect even further?
I think it worked well, but I think we could do it. We could push it even more. And what I thought was also fascinating, that in the final part of the event, Ben and the actors actually joined in the conversation, and kind of having their input into the discussion was really, really interesting, because they came at it from a completely different point of view. So I think I would try to push that even further, and certainly sort of I know a lot of people found their final play, which was a monologue about given by a speech given by an AI, quite disturbing. I think it left them with a really interesting sense of unease, which probably encapsulated a little bit the overall conversation of the evening, because AI is such a fascinating, such a complex topic, such a scary topic in a lot of ways, especially for people who are not necessarily experts, who have been thinking about this for a long time. So I think in that sense, it really worked. But I would like to see even more of a dialogue. I think that was a really crucial part of the event, and I would really sort of try to weave it in all the conversations.
Ben, as a kind of a closing question, I feel when I watch films about future scenarios or worlds that involve a lot of robotics and artificial intelligence, there's often a really dystopian kind of pallor, that is either part of the look or the feel, or it's the story itself. With the stage performance, though, I didn't come away feeling quite as crushed as I potentially might have. And as Emma pointed out, the last speech is dark in the performance, but is there something different about having a live performance that just presents a little more possibility, a little more humanity to the kind of things we're talking about here, like AI or robotics, which can be scary?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm biased because I write theatre and it's all I do, but I've done film and television work a lot, and I think when you think about performances in your life, the major performances you remember aren't necessarily film. Being in the cinema and seeing that actor or that story being told. It's being at the theatre. Whether it was good or bad, you remember it. And there's something incredibly intimate and visceral about theatre, live theatre, that people will remember. And going on from what Emma said, in the bar, everyone wanted to talk to the actors and the creators, which I found bizarre, because I thought we're just a bunch of thespians, they won't care. But they really wanted to know our opinion, which is, I undervalued us, and rightly so, but they really wanted to know what we thought and felt. And I think the other thing about theatre is how cathartic it can be. I mean, if you go, I've got to be careful what I say, but if you go into the West End, there's so much bad theatre that you pay a huge amount of money for, that skirts around the problem or the situation or the theme or the issue quite a lot. All right, and that's not about forcing something down someone's throat, but it's about putting it on a plate and saying, let's create a dialogue, which is what we did the other night completely, and we can do that more. But the other thing is, with theatre, you're supposed to feel a cathartic sense that things can be fixed. If I take it way back, you know, when it was created in ancient Greece, a play would go on. You know, you think about Women of Troy, that's a pretty controversial play about, you know, rape and pillage, about the people sitting in the audience who probably were involved. They get the whole village, thousands of people, to come and witness that event. And then they would have to sit with it, think about it, discuss it amongst themselves, and then move on and change things. So the Greeks got it right, in which I don't think we get right today, is that the thing with theatre is it's supposed to be deeply intimate, very visceral, very cathartic, and an experience, a live experience that the audience will feel. Because, you know, when the people came in, they were excited. When they came out, you know, these were people in suits. They were so animated and excited. Even, you know, we were saying things that were pretty harsh about them, you know, things that were very controversial, things that they didn't want to talk about, or they did want to talk about, but they didn't know how. And when we put it on a plate for them, they, you know, I was going up to wing commanders, and we were saying some pretty terrible things about the military, but they loved it because they hadn't had it before. Whereas you go to the cinema and you watch a film, you know, it doesn't quite do it for you. It doesn't push the buttons. It's a cinematic experience rather than a visceral one.
Well, Ben, again, thank you for your work directing this, and Emma producing. It was a memorable evening, and we're certain to be able to do more, hopefully in 2018.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.